Why study psychology? So you might think that some of the things psychologists study are kind of obvious. They're not things that are mind-blowingly cool. They study behavior. We all have our own intuitions about behavior. We all have our own ways that we think it works, and this is something that can kind of be a misconception about psychology, that they're confirming things that we already know about ourselves. The weekend effect. One kind of funny example is there was a recent study that studied the weekend effect. That's what they called it in the paper, and there were some researchers at the University of Rochester. What they concluded was that, regardless of whatever job you have, people are happier on the weekend than they are during the week. And this is something that your personal experience has probably confirmed over and over again. You might not think that this is something that scientists need to study. Well, in this case, the obvious hypothesis is that the weekend is more fun than the non-weekend. While in this case this was proved to be true, there are a lot of instances in psychology where this hasn't been true. Some of the coolest experiments have been when people have thought things to be obvious but they've turned out not to be. This would be like if your weekend effect experiment actually proved that people were happier during the work week. That would be the magnitude of some of these experiments that disprove the hypothesis. That seems crazy. It isn't true in this case, but in some cases it is. As an example of this, let's say your friend decides to design an experiment where he's going to see if people get an incredibly easy question wrong just because everyone else in the room is answering wrong as well. The misattribution effect. And there's another study that shows this perfectly. It's about how people misattribute why they're feeling the way they're feeling. In this particular study, the researchers decided to have men go out on a bridge. They had two bridges, one of which is kind of shaky like one of those wooden Indiana Jones bridges where you figure a plank may fall out in the middle. And one of them is really sturdy, it's not going anywhere, you're going to be fine if you're on this bridge. The men would cross this bridge and afterward they would talk to a woman, who would be considered by most as attractive, who was posing as the researcher. And she would ask them a bunch of questions. She would ask them the kind of design scenarios based around certain questions, and she would also give them her phone number to see if they had any questions about the experiment. And you know they'd most likely call her if they were attracted to her. And what they found is the ones who went over this shaky bridge in asking their questions and designing the stories that the questions were supposed to elicit, they were actually way more sexual than the ones who went over the not-so-shaky bridge. And they were way more likely to call the researcher if they went across the shaky bridge. So, shaky bridge equals more sexual content in their answers, and it also equals calling the researcher. Not shaky bridge equals none of that. And what the guys designing this experiment basically concluded was that if you get scared, you're walking across a shaky bridge and you get scared and your heart's racing, and you're feeling kind of physiologically aroused in a nondescript way, they attributed this to the woman. And so they wanted to call because they thought they were feeling all sort of out of whack and heart racing because of her and not necessarily because of the shaky bridge.